I spent 35 years scrubbing hospital floors to put him in that corner office. Yet tonight, I sit at the far end of the table like a stranger. My son raises a glass of vintage wine to another woman, calling her the mother he never had. He thinks my silence is submission. He has no idea that the very foundation of his expensive life is a house of cards, and I am the one holding the match. My name is Eleanor Hart. At 63 years old, I have learned that the silence of an empty house is heavy, but the silence from a son is crushing. I live in the outskirts of Brookridge, Colorado, in the same modest bungalow where my late husband Jonathan and I raised our boy. For 35 years, I wore the sensible white shoes of a nurse, my feet aching on the hard tile floors of the city hospital, pulling double shifts to keep the lights on. Now, I spend my mornings working part-time at Haven Ridge Outreach, a small community centre where people look you in the eye when they say thank you, and where a warm coat means more than a stock portfolio. This house holds the ghosts of a harder time. It remembers the nights I left my son sleeping to work the graveyard shift, praying he would not wake up scared. It remembers the meals made from discount bins, the meat stretching over 3 nights, and the way I pawned my jewelry to pay his tuition. Daniel, my son, is 38 now. He is a senior manager at Skyline Heritage Group, wearing suits that cost more than my car. He has forgotten the smell of generic laundry detergent. But I have not forgotten the day I advanced my salary for 6 months just to pay for his first semester of university. He married Lauren, a woman who has never known the panic of an overdrawn bank account. Her mother, Margaret Collins, is a widow of a different breed. Margaret is elegant, a woman of silk scarves and afternoon teas who has always lived in the soft embrace of wealth. Around her, with my rough hands and department store clothes, I always feel like the hired help who wandered into the parlor by mistake. She speaks of vacations in Europe while I worry about the rising cost of heating oil. Mother's Day was approaching, and the air in my kitchen smelled of cinnamon and nutmeg. I was baking a rustic apple pie, using Jonathan's old recipe, even though my arthritis complained with every slice of the fruit. For the last 4 years, Daniel had been too busy for me. I usually received a card in the mail or a flower delivery ordered by a secretary who did not know my favorite color. But this year, I felt a foolish spark of hope. I believed that perhaps, finally, he would make time for me. Then, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from Daniel. Sunday night, 7 o'clock, Belmont on the river. You come. I want to do something special this year. My heart hammered against my ribs. The Belmont on the river. It was the most expensive restaurant in the city, the kind of place where the napkins are linen and the water is bottled in Italy. He was finally doing it. He was finally making a gesture to bridge the gap that had grown between us like a canyon. I tried to silence the nagging voice in the back of my mind. Lately, Daniel sounded more like he was speaking to a client than his mother. His voice had lost its warmth, replaced by a polished, hollow tone that kept me at arm's length. He never asked about my blood pressure or the leak in the roof. He only called when he needed a signature or a favor. But I pushed the thought away. This was Mother's Day. He was trying. I stood before the hallway mirror, smoothing down my navy blue dress. It was 5 years old, but I had ironed it until the fabric looked sharp. I practiced my smile, checking for lipstick on my teeth, wanting to look proud for him. In my purse, I tucked a small velvet box. Inside rested Jonathan's silver tie clip. It was not worth thousands, but it was the only thing of value my husband had left. I intended to give it to Daniel tonight as a symbol that he was the head of the family now, a torch passed from father to son. Before I left, I paused at my desk and opened the bottom drawer. There it sat, a thick, beige file folder. It looked boring, mundane even, but inside that folder lay the deed to Daniel's modern house, the signed contracts for 3 massive business loan guarantees, and the founding documents of the Hart Collins Foundation. Daniel believed the foundation was his legacy, a birthright from the Collins side of the family. He had never bothered to read the fine print. I ran my hand over the edge of the folder, feeling the sharpness of the paper. I closed the drawer with a soft click. "Just show me a little respect," I whispered to the empty room. "Just a little bit. Daniel? And I will leave it all to you." I grabbed my coat and walked out the door, unaware that I was walking into a firing squad. The Belmont on the river was an assault on my senses, a place where the scent of expensive perfume mingled with the aroma of truffle oil. Golden lights reflected off the dark water of the river outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a shimmering glow over the diners who spoke in hushed, confident tones. I tightened the belt of my beige raincoat, suddenly acutely aware of the fraying cuffs. Amidst the tailored suits and silk evening gowns, I felt like an intruder, a grey moth fluttering into a swarm of butterflies. The hostess led me through the maze of tables, and my heart gave a joyful leap when I saw them. But the leap turned into a stumble. The long table was already full. Daniel, his wife Lauren, my 2 teenage grandchildren, and Lauren's mother, Margaret Collins, were already seated. They were laughing, their crystal glasses clinking in a toast I had missed. The chair directly to Daniel's right, the place of honour, was occupied by Margaret. Daniel did not stand up when I approached. It was Lauren who rose, her smile bright and practiced. She stepped forward and gave me a hug that barely touched my shoulders, pulling away before I could return it. "Mom is here," Lauren announced, her voice pitched loud enough for the neighbouring tables to hear. "I was afraid you forgot that tonight is the Mother's Day dinner for my mum." She turned back instantly, linking her arm through Margaret's. "Right. Mum?" She beamed at Margaret. I stood there, clutching my purse, confused. Daniel finally looked up, gesturing vaguely to the empty chair at the very foot of the table, right next to the kitchen traffic. "You sit here, Mom," Daniel said, his voice flat. "It is better for Mother Margaret to sit next to us for convenience. The restaurant set it up this way." He said it as if it were a law of physics, undeniable and unchangeable. I sat down, my knees shaking. A waiter immediately brushed past my shoulder, nearly knocking me forward. Before I could even unfold my napkin, the manager appeared. He was followed by 2 servers carrying a massive bouquet of imported orchids, a velvet jewellery box, and a bottle of wine that looked older than I was. "For the lady of the hour," Daniel proclaimed. "Happy Mother's Day." Grandma Margaret, the children cheered in unison. "You are the best mom in the family?" Margaret feigned surprise, pressing a manicured hand to her chest. "Oh, you spoil me." She laughed, the diamonds on her wrist catching the light. I sat with my hands in my lap, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. Then, a young waitress hurried over to my end of the table. She held a small, plastic-wrapped bunch of carnations, the kind sold in buckets at the grocery store checkout. "Oh, and Daniel said to give this to you," she muttered, placing them next to my water glass before rushing off. There was no card, no wish. Daniel did not even look at me. I touched the crinkling plastic, feeling a cold stone settle in my stomach. Then Daniel stood up, tapping his fork against his wineglass. The table fell silent. "I want to make a toast," Daniel began, looking adoringly at Margaret. "To the woman who gave me a sense of what a real home is, to the woman who taught me how to live with class and dignity. You have been with me since the day I started my business, guiding me, showing me the standards I need to uphold. I would not be the man I am without your influence." I felt the blood drain from my face. Gave him a home, I was the one who worked double shifts to keep the roof over his head. Taught him class, I was the one who ironed his shirts at 2 a.m, so he would not look poor at school. Since the day he started, I was the one who mortgaged my house to fund his first project. I looked around, desperate for air. At the table next to us, a woman turned. It was Beverly, a volunteer I worked with at the center. She recognized me. Her eyes darted from the orchids in front of Margaret to the sad little carnations in front of me, and then she looked at my face with a pity so deep it burned. I looked down, unable to bear the weight of her sympathy. I must have been staring blankly at the flowers because Daniel leaned over. He did not speak to me as a son. He spoke in a low, icy hiss, the voice he used for incompetent employees. "Mom, try not to make a scene tonight. I have to keep up an image with Lauren's family and the partners here. You understand?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Then my granddaughter, bored with the speeches, asked loudly, "Why isn't Grandpa Ethan here on Mother's Day?" The table erupted in polite laughter. Lauren patted her daughter's hand. "Because tonight is for my mum, the most important woman," Lauren said smoothly. "The most important woman." The words hit me like a physical blow. My hand spasmed. The silver soup spoon I had been gripping slipped from my fingers and clattered loudly against the fine china bowl. The sound rang out like a gunshot in the sophisticated room. Silence fell over the table. Margaret frowned, adjusting her pearl necklace. Lauren sighed, an exasperated puff of air. Daniel closed his eyes for a second, a look of intense annoyance crossing his face, before he glared at me. "Careful," he mouthed. I looked at them, my son, his family, the strangers I had sacrificed my life for. And for the first time in 35 years, I did not see my little boy. I saw a man who had erased me. "Excuse me. I just need to use the restroom for a moment," I murmured, pushing my chair back. My legs felt heavy, like they were made of lead, as I walked away from the table. The noise of the restaurant seemed to distort, the laughter and clinking silverware blending into a mocking buzz. I felt the eyes of strangers on me, or perhaps I just imagined them, judging the woman in the discount department store dress, walking away from the table of elites. It felt like I was floating through a nightmare, one where you scream, but no sound comes out. I pushed open the heavy mahogany door of the ladies' room and leaned against the cold marble sink. I stared at my reflection in the expansive, gold-framed mirror. The woman staring back looked grey. My hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun, the silver strands wiry and dull under the harsh vanity lights. The lines around my eyes were deep, etched by years of squinting at medical charts and worrying about bills. The pale pink lipstick I had applied so carefully at home now looked pathetic, a desperate attempt to hide the exhaustion on my face. I did not look like the most important woman in anyone's life. I looked like what I was treated as a relic, a utility to be used and discarded. Memories clawed at my throat. I looked at my hands, now wrinkled and spotted. These were the hands that had pawned my own mother's engagement ring 20 years ago to pay for Daniel's second semester of tuition. These were the hands that had gripped the steering wheel, driving home from double shifts at 4 in the morning, fighting sleep just to make sure there was milk in the fridge. I remembered the times I had covered for him, smoothing over his youthful recklessness with the law and the banks, always telling myself, he is just young. He will find his way. My mind drifted back 5 years. Daniel had come to me, desperate, his eyes wide and pleading. He wanted to launch his first independent real estate project, but he had no capital. Without hesitating, I had signed the papers to mortgage my house. The house Jonathan and I had paid off with blood and sweat. I signed a stack of documents I barely read because Daniel had held my hand and said, "Trust me, Mom. This is for our future." I pulled my phone from my purse, my fingers trembling. I opened our text history. I scrolled up, past today's summons to dinner. It was a wasteland of transaction. "Mum, can you transfer 200 short on cash?" "Mum, did the bank call you for the verification?" "Mum, I need you to sign for a package." There was not a single, "How are you?" in 6 months. Not one. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a flock of 3 older women burst in. They were dressed in silk and velvet, their laughter echoing off the tiled walls. "Did you see the bracelet he gave me?" One woman shrieked with delight. "My son treats me like a queen. Every Mother's Day. It gets better." "I know," another chimed in. "We are going to Paris next week. He said he couldn't let the year pass without spoiling me." I shrank back into the corner, turning on the faucet to drown out their joy. I washed my hands vigorously, staring at the drain. I did not belong in their world. I did not belong at Daniel's table. But the shame was quickly curding into something else. It was turning into a cold, hard knot in my chest. I thought about Daniel's whispered command at the table. "Don't make a scene." He was terrified I would embarrass him. He valued the approval of Margaret and his business partners more than the dignity of the woman who had saved him from financial ruin twice before he turned 30. The water ran cold over my fingers, and clarity struck me like a bolt of lightning. I stopped scrubbing. I thought about the beige file folder sitting in my desk drawer at home. I thought about the HartCollins Foundation. Daniel strutted around town acting as if he owned the city, but he never read the fine print. He was so arrogant, so sure of his place in the world, that he forgot who actually signed the checks. He assumed the foundation was his legacy, a gift from Margaret's side. But legally, Margaret had been too afraid of liability to put her name on the risky assets. I stared at myself in the mirror again. The sadness in my eyes was receding, replaced by a steely glint I had not seen since Jonathan died. On paper, Daniel was not the one supporting me. I was the trustee. I was the primary guarantor. I was the only thing standing between his corporate empire and a foreclosure notice. He was not holding me up. I was the pillar he was leaning on while he kicked me in the shins. I reached for a paper towel and dried my hands with slow, deliberate movements. I wiped the smudge of mascara from beneath my eye. I smoothed the stray hairs of my bun. "Okay. Daniel," I whispered to the reflection, my voice steady and low. "You have made your choice. You chose who your most important woman is. I think it is time I choose my most important child." I tossed the paper towel into the trash can. It landed with a soft thud. I straightened my spine, took a deep breath, and turned toward the door. I was ready to go back out there, not to beg for scraps of affection, but to say goodbye to the son I thought I knew. I returned to the table with a mask of calm so perfect it surprised even me. I slid back into my seat, smoothed my napkin, and looked at my son. "We should take a picture," I said, my voice steady and light. "Everyone is dressed so beautifully. Daniel, why don't you stand between us, between your two mothers?" Lauren clapped her hands, delighted by the idea of content for her social media. The waiter took the phone. Daniel stood up, draping one arm around Margaret's silk-covered shoulder and the other stiffly around my polyester coat. I smiled straight into the lens, freezing the moment. I knew that one day Daniel would look at this photograph and realize it was the exact moment the ground beneath him began to crack. For the rest of the meal, I said very little. I became a ghost at the feast, watching with the cold precision of an auditor. I watched Daniel pour the last of the vintage wine into Margaret's glass, leaving mine empty. I watched Lauren wave her hand to emphasize a story, the light catching on her new diamond ring. Daniel picked it out himself. She gushed. I took a sip of water. Daniel had picked it out, but the credit limit that allowed the purchase was secured by my signature. My grandchildren started chattering about their upcoming summer. "We are going to the beach house for 3 weeks," my grandson announced. "Grandma Margaret said the view is awesome. It's the Collins family retreat," Margaret added with a modest shrug. I sliced my steak. It was actually the Skyline Company retreat, purchased 2 years ago under a leverage agreement that required a guarantor with a pristine 30-year credit history. Me? When the bill arrived, Daniel waved the waiter over with a flourish. He pulled out a heavy, black card. It was the Skyline Heritage Group Corporate Platinum card. "Business has been good," Daniel said, winking at his wife. "I have got this." He tossed the card onto the tray. It landed face up. The gold chip glinted under the chandelier. Daniel saw the logo of his company. I saw the small, silver embossed letters in the bottom left corner. Secondary guarantee, Eleanor M. Heart. The drive home was short and silent. When we pulled up to the curb of my small wooden house, Daniel did not kill the engine. The car purred, ready to speed away. "I still have to take Mother Margaret out for a nightcap," he said, staring through the windshield. "You go in and rest. I will pick you up next time, if you promise not to be so sensitive." "Good night, Daniel," I said. I stepped out, and before I reached my front porch, his taillights were already fading into the dark. Inside, the house was quiet. I took off my shoes and placed the supermarket carnations into an old glass vase. The stems were too short and the blooms too heavy. They flopped over the side, broken and sad. I did not bother to rearrange them. I walked to the dining table and sat down. I opened the drawer and pulled out the beige file. It was time to review the reality of Daniel's success. To the world, Daniel was a self-made man, a visionary developer. To the legal system, he was a risk. When the Hart Collins Foundation was established, Margaret Collins had refused to put her name on any binding documents. She wanted the prestige of a family fund, but none of the liability. She was terrified of losing her personal fortune if a deal went south. So, they had come to me. I was the trusted one. I was the safe pair of hands. I was the primary trustee. I held 40% of the voting shares in Skyline Heritage Group. I opened my old laptop, the fan whirring loudly in the silent kitchen. Daniel thought I used this machine only for solitaire and email. He did not know I had the login credentials for the corporate banking portal. I typed in the password. The screen loaded. I scrolled through the list of active liabilities. It was staggering. Item 1, residential mortgage, secured by guarantor Eleanor M. Hart. Item 2, 3 corporate credit cards, joint liability. Item 3, commercial bridge loan for the Riverfront Heights project. Status active. Primary collateral assets of Hart Collins Foundation, Riverfront Heights. That was his crown jewel. The massive development that was supposed to make him a millionaire twice over. I reached for my notebook and found the number for Frances Doyle. She was the lawyer who had helped me with Jonathan's will, a woman who had a mind like a steel trap. I typed a text message. I need to speak about terminating financial guarantees and restructuring the family fund. Tomorrow morning, as soon as possible. I pressed send. I looked back at the screen, at the millions of dollars in debt that hung over my son's head by a single thread. That thread was me. For years. I had been terrified of these numbers. I had been scared that if I moved, everything would fall. But as I sat there in my empty kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, I did not feel fear. I felt a strange, cold power coursing through my veins. It was the clarity of a surgeon picking up a scalpel. I was not going to destroy him. I was simply going to stop saving him. And for a man like Daniel, there was no difference. By 8:30 on Monday morning, I was seated in the leather chair across from Frances Doyle. Her office smelled of old paper and lemon polish, a stark contrast to the sterile, expensive scent of Daniel's corporate headquarters. Frances was 55, sharp as a tack, and had handled Jonathan's estate with a kindness I never forgot. Today, however, there was no kindness in her eyes, only the cold calculation of a legal shark. I laid it all out. The dinner, the humiliation, the years of using my name to build a house of cards while treating me like the wind that might blow it down. Frances adjusted her glasses, reading through the summary I had compiled. "You understand what you are asking." "Eleanor," Frances said, her voice dry. "As the primary trustee and the sole guarantor on these instruments, you have the absolute right to withdraw. But if you pull the collateral, the bank will call the loans immediately. This will crush him. He could lose the house, the company, his reputation. Are you truly ready for that?" I looked at the framed degree on her wall, refusing to blink. "He has already destroyed something much larger," I replied softly. "He destroyed the respect due to a mother. He thinks he is a giant. I am simply returning him to his actual size. I am just giving him reality." We got to work. It was a flurry of typing and printing. We drafted the notice of revocation for the loan guarantees. We drafted the formal withdrawal of Hart Collins Foundation assets from Skyline Heritage Group. Then came the masterstroke, a resolution to suspend Daniel's voting rights within the family foundation based on a breach of the ethical standards and family values. A clause I had insisted on years ago, which Daniel had laughed at. "One more thing," I said. "The will." I instructed Frances to remove Daniel as the primary beneficiary. Instead, the bulk of my estate, including the final control of the foundation, would go to the Jonathan Hart Community Nursing Scholarship, a fund for nursing students from low-income backgrounds. "Done," Frances said, the printer whirring. I signed my name with a flourish I did not know I possessed. I left her office and drove straight to the main branch of the First National Bank. When I walked in, I did not wait in the line. I walked to the glass-walled office of the branch manager. The young teller tried to stop me. "Ma'am, you can't just— I am Eleanor Hart," I said, my voice carrying across the lobby. "I am the primary guarantor on the Skyline Heritage corporate accounts. Get me the manager." 10 minutes later, I was sitting opposite a sweating bank manager. He looked at the documents Francis had prepared, then at his computer screen, then back at me. He picked up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. I need legal on the line. Now." He tried to argue. He tried to explain that this would freeze operations for a major client. It is not a negotiation. I cut him off. My signature secures those funds. I am removing my signature effective immediately. And the corporate credit card ending in 4589, the one being used for personal dinners, freeze it. Now. He typed the command. It is done. Mrs. Hart. My final stop was the small office suite rented by the Hart Collins Foundation. It was a quiet place, usually only visited by Margaret for photo opportunities. When I walked in, the two administrative assistants looked up, startled. They were used to seeing me in my nurse's uniform, dropping off cookies. Today, I wore a tailored black blazer I hadn't worn in a decade. "Call the board," I ordered. "Emergency meeting. Quorum is present with my vote." The few board members present, mostly old friends of the Collins family who held honorary titles, gathered in the conference room. They looked confused. I stood at the head of the table. "I am moving to divest all foundation capital from Skyline Heritage Group," I announced, sliding the resolution down the mahogany table. Reason: conflict of interest, lack of financial transparency, and gross disrespect toward a co-founder. A heavy silence filled the room. They knew who the co-founder was. They knew who the CEO of Skyline was. No one dared to speak. The motion passed. I walked out of the building just as the clock struck noon. I sat on a concrete bench outside the bank, watching the city traffic rush by. The wind whipped my grey hair across my face. I felt light, terrifyingly light. I wondered, briefly, if I had just saved my son from his own arrogance, or if I had just executed him. "He will decide," I said to the wind. "He will decide by how he faces the rain." I woke up on Monday morning feeling invincible. The sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the master bedroom, illuminating the modern art on the walls and the high thread count sheets. It was a house that screamed success, a house I believed I had earned. I stretched, thinking back to the dinner. Sure, Mum had been a little quiet, but the strategy had worked. Margaret was charmed. The partners at the nearby table had seen me treating my family to the best. And Lauren was happy. I had managed the situation perfectly. I whistled as I drove my least luxury sedan to my usual coffee spot, the Roasted Bean. I ordered a triple-shot espresso, eager to get to the office and close the deal on the new mall project. "That'll be $7.50. Mr. Hart," the barista said, smiling. I pulled out the Skyline Heritage Corporate Platinum card, the heavy metal one that made a satisfying clack on the counter, and tapped it. The machine buzzed. A harsh, red light flashed. "Decline," the barista said, looking confused. "Maybe the chip is dirty. Try it again," I said, chuckling. "There is no limit on that card." She inserted it this time. Buzz. Declined again. Sir. I felt a prickle of heat on the back of my neck. Ridiculous. Just take my personal visa. I handed over my own card. The machine whirred for a long time, then gave the same angry buzz. Declined. People in the line behind me started to shuffle their feet. My face burned. I threw a $10 bill on the counter cash I luckily had in my pocket and walked out without waiting for the change. As soon as I got into the car, my phone exploded. It was not a text. It was a call from the Chief Financial Officer of Skyline. Daniel. What is going on? He shouted, his voice cracking. The bank just called. They said the primary guarantor on the credit line has formally withdrawn. They are freezing the operating accounts. Calm down, I snapped, though my own heart was hammering. It is a mistake. I will fix ping. An email notification dropped down on my screen. It was from the Commercial Lending Department of the First National Bank. The subject line was in all caps. Notice of default and immediate demand for payment. They were calling in the bridge loan for the Riverfront Heights project. They wanted $4 million by the end of the business day, or they would seize the assets. I floored the gas pedal, speeding toward the Skyline Tower. My hands were slick with sweat on the leather steering wheel. When I reached the executive parking garage, I rolled down the window and tapped my badge against the reader. Beep, beep, beep. The screen flashed. Access denied. Invalid credentials. Come on, I hit the steering wheel. Cars were lining up behind me, honking. I had to reverse, shame burning in my gut, and drive around to the visitor lot blocks away. I had to take a ticket like a common tourist. I ran to the building, bypassed the receptionist, and took the elevator to the 20th floor. When the doors opened, the atmosphere was wrong. It was too quiet. People were whispering in huddles, looking at me with wide, frightened eyes. I marched to my corner office. The door was closed. A piece of white printer paper was taped over my nameplate. Temporary meeting room. By order of the Hart Collins Foundation. What is this? I roared. My assistant, Sarah, stood up from her desk. She was shaking. She held out a thick envelope. I am so sorry. Daniel? They are in there now. They told me to give you this? I ripped the envelope open. It was a formal notice of an emergency shareholder meeting. I scanned the lines, my vision blurring. Resolution to divest all capital. Suspension of executive powers due to breach of fiduciary duty and ethical conflict. I grabbed my phone and dialed Margaret. She had to stop this. She was the Collins matriarch. She could overrule whatever clerical error this was. Margaret, you need to call the board right now, I said the moment she picked up. Mom is having some kind of episode, or her lawyer is insane. They are trying to tank the company. Margaret's voice came through the line, colder than liquid nitrogen. I received the same notice. Daniel, I just finished reading the attachment. Your mother signed it first thing this morning. She doesn't know what she is doing, I yelled. She knows exactly what she is doing. Margaret cut me off. You told me she was a simple woman. Daniel, you told me she was weak. Ha! It turns out she is the only one of us with any teeth. Do not call me again until you fix your mess. The line went dead. My phone rang again. It was the company's corporate counsel. Mr. Hart, the lawyer said, his tone devoid of its usual friendliness. With the withdrawal of the Foundation's guarantee, Skyline is technically insolvent. The board is discussing an interim CEO to try and salvage the remaining assets. Your position is... untenable. I slumped against the wall of the hallway. I looked at the closed door of my office, the office I had built, the empire I thought was mine. It was all smoke. It had always been smoke. Ding. Another email. This one was from my personal mortgage lender. Dear Mr. Hart, regarding the property at 45 Oak Ridge Drive. Due to the cancellation of the third-party guarantee provided by Eleanor M. Hart, your mortgage is in default. Please provide alternative collateral of equal value or full payment within 30 days to avoid foreclosure proceedings. 30 days. I had 30 days before I lost the roof over my children's heads. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through my arrogance. I needed her. I needed her to sign the papers again. I would apologize. I would buy her a car. I would do anything. I dialed her number. My thumb hit the contact. Mum? It rang once, then a click, and then a robotic voice, flat and final. The number you are calling is not accepting calls from this number. Please hang up. I lowered the phone slowly. The silence of the hallway seemed to press against my eardrums. I stood there in my Italian suit, holding my useless car keys, realizing I was a trespasser in my own life. Everything I touched, the office, the house, the money, had a lock on it, and I had just realized she was the one holding the keys. Suddenly, the image of her face from last night flashed in my mind. That moment when she had looked at the cheap carnations, then looked at me. I had thought her silence was submission. Oh my God, I whispered, my voice trembling. She wasn't sad. She was deciding. I sped home, my mind racing with a desperate narrative. I convinced myself that I could spin this. I would tell Lauren that Mom had finally snapped, that she was consumed by a senile jealousy of Margaret and was lashing out to destroy our happiness. If I could get Lauren on my side, we could present a united front. We could paint Mom as unstable and maybe even get a competency hearing to reverse her decisions. I burst through the front door, already breathless. "Lauren," I shouted, throwing my keys on the console table. "You are not going to believe what she has done. Mom has completely lost her mind. She's jealous because I toasted Margaret last night, and now she is trying to burn everything down just to—" I stopped. Lauren was sitting at the dining room table. She was not crying. She was not pacing. She was sitting perfectly still, staring at a stack of documents spread out before her. A thick, cream-coloured envelope with a courier's seal sat empty next to her hand. She looked up. Her eyes were red, but her expression was stone cold. Jealous Lauren asked, her voice dangerously quiet, "Is that what you think this is?" She cut the credit lines. "Lauren." I walked into the room, waving my hands. "She is trying to bankrupt us out of spite." Lauren picked up a sheet of paper. "This is a letter from your mother. It came an hour ago. It details the history of the Hart Collins Foundation. Did you know she liquidated her entire pension fund, 30 years of savings, to pay off your first bankruptcy settlement 7 years ago? You told me you sold a patent." I froze. I didn't want to worry you back then. "And this house," Lauren continued, picking up a copy of a deed. "You told me the company bought it? You told me it was a perk of your position. But it says here that Eleanor Hart is the 50% co-owner and the sole guarantor of the mortgage. This isn't a company perk, Daniel. Your mother bought this house. She is manipulating the facts," I stammered, feeling the walls closing in. "She thinks she owns me just because she signed a few papers." "You cannot believe her over your husband," Lauren stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. She grabbed a specific document and threw it at my chest. It fluttered to the floor between us. "And this," she yelled, her composure cracking. She included a copy of the notarized affidavit from 5 years ago. You made her sign blank signature pages. She says you told her they were for a medical power of attorney in case she got sick, but they were attached to the loan documents for your commercial expansion. You tricked your own mother into signing away her security. I was protecting her from the stress of the details, I shouted back. It was business. It was fraud. "Daniel," a voice said from the doorway. I spun around. Margaret was standing there. She held a duplicate set of documents in her hand. My mother-in-law, usually the picture of soft elegance, looked like a judge delivering a death sentence. "Margaret, please," I pleaded, stepping toward her. "You know how business works. Mom is making this up. She is just, stop talking." Margaret snapped. "I just finished reading Eleanor's letter. Do not insult my intelligence. For years, I wondered how a small firm like yours secured such high-risk loans. Now I know. Eleanor." Margaret walked into the room and stood next to Lauren. "Do you know why I let Eleanor be the primary trustee?" Margaret asked, her eyes boring into mine. "Because I told my late husband that Daniel's mother was more trustworthy than any man who had ever stepped into my daughter's life. I trusted her character, and clearly, she used every ounce of that character to cover for your incompetence. She is just bitter because of the dinner I tried to deflect, desperate to shift the focus. She felt left out, so she is punishing us." "Last night," Margaret said, her voice shaking with repressed anger, "I sat there and listened to you give that speech. You talked about the woman who gave you a home, who taught you class. I sat there preening, thinking you were just being charming. But looking at these papers, looking at what she sacrificed, you were talking about her. You described everything she did for you, and you gave the credit to me, just to make yourself look rich." Lauren covered her mouth, a sob escaping. "We made her sit at the end of the table. Daniel, we gave her supermarket flowers while she was literally paying for the roof over our heads. She is dramatic," I insisted, though my voice was losing its power. "She refuses to accept that I am a grown man. She wants to control me." "Being a grown man means standing on your own 2 feet?" Lauren screamed at me. "It does not mean forcing your mother to be your spine and then humiliating her in public." Margaret stepped forward, her face full of a strange, sad regret. "There is one thing you should know, Daniel," Margaret said quietly. "Eleanor came to me 3 years ago. She came to my house. She told me she was worried she was crippling you by helping too much. She wanted to start stepping back financially so you could learn to be independent. She wanted to retire for real." I stared at her, stunned. "What I stopped her," Margaret admitted, looking down at the floor. "I told her that you were fragile. I told her that the business world was too hard and that you needed a safety net a little longer. I begged her to keep signing for you. I thought I was helping you." She looked up, her eyes wet. "That was the biggest mistake of my life. We both created a monster. So you are going to help me fix this, right?" I asked, looking between the two of them. "Margaret, you can call the bank. Lauren, you can talk to her." Lauren wiped her face and stepped back, linking her arm through her mother's. It was a mirror image of the night before, but this time, I was the one on the outside. "No," Lauren said. "I am not cleaning this up. If you want to save yourself, you go to her. You face her." And Daniel Margaret added, her voice icy, "Do not expect us to be waiting with open arms if you fail. I tolerated you because I thought you were a provider. It turns out you are just a parasite." They turned their backs on me and walked into the kitchen, leaving me standing alone in the living room that I suddenly realized had never really been mine. The silence in my living room was louder than a scream, and in that vacuum, a memory from 10 years ago surfaced with violent clarity. I was 28, working for a brokerage firm, and I had been caught skimming off the top of a commission structure. It was a grey area, I had told myself, but the firm called it theft. They were going to fire me and press charges unless I paid back $5,000 immediately. I didn't have a dime. Eleanor did not lecture me. She simply sold her red sedan, the one thing she bought for herself, after Dad died, and handed me the cash. She took the bus to work for the next 3 years. I also remembered a night in her kitchen, maybe 4 years ago. I was drinking scotch with 2 buddies, bragging about my rise. I built this from the ground up. I had boasted, slamming my hand on the table, no handouts, just pure grit. I had seen Mom turn away at the sink, her shoulders shaking. I thought she was being emotional, perhaps crying because she was proud. Now, as the walls of my life closed in, I realized she was crying because I had looked her in the face and erased her existence. I had taken her sacrifice and painted over it with my vanity. My phone buzzed, jarring me back to the present. It was an email. Not from the bank this time, but from the State Real Estate Ethics Board. Notice of inquiry regarding Skyline Heritage transactions. Complainant Francis Doyle, representing the minority stakeholder. My stomach dropped. Mum was the minority stakeholder. She was not going to the police. That would be too messy. She was doing something far more surgical. She was demanding an independent audit of the foundation's funds versus my personal spending. She was forcing the light into the dark corners where I hid my lifestyle expenses. She was not sending me to jail. She was just opening the door and letting the consequences walk in. I ran to my car. I drove to the old bungalow like a madman, ignoring stop signs. I pulled up onto the grass and pounded on the front door. "Mum, open the door. We need to talk, please." The door remained shut, but the window of the house next door slid open. Mr. Wallace, her neighbour of 20 years, leaned out. He looked at me with a gaze that held zero sympathy. "She is not home." "Daniel." "Mr. Wallace called out, his voice raspy. "She's been gone all morning. Lawyers. And that community centre she likes. You should be careful. Son." "Your mother?" "She looks soft. But she's not stupid." I slumped down onto the wooden porch steps, burying my face in my hands. The smell of the old wood triggered another memory. Dad's stroke. I was 20. Mum was working double shifts to pay the medical bills, coming home to change his sheets and feed him. I was speeding around town in a car she paid for, racking up tickets. She paid those too. I remembered holding her hand by Dad's bed and whispering, "I will take care of you one day. Mum, I promise." That promise had evaporated the moment I saw my first big paycheck. While my son sat shivering on my porch, I sat in the warm, cluttered office of the Northbridge Haven director, Sarah Jenkins. I was not trembling. I did not feel guilt. I had spent a lifetime cushioning Daniel from the hard edges of the world, and all it had done was make him soft and cruel. I was not pushing him off a cliff. I was simply letting go of his hand so he could finally learn how to fall. "Mrs. Hart, are you sure about this?" Sarah asked. her eyes wide as she looked at the check and the transfer documents. This is a significant amount. This is a legacy donation. It was the remaining liquid assets of the Hart Collins Foundation, the money that was not tied up in Daniel's failing company. I am sure, I said, smoothing my skirt. I want to establish a grant for single mothers, specifically for women who are trying to finish their education while raising children alone. I want to help women who have been abandoned, even if they were abandoned by the very children they raised. Sarah looked at me, confused but deeply moved. This will change hundreds of lives. Eleanor? But why now? I looked out the window, watching the rain start to streak the glass, because for 38 years, I was a shadow in my son's life. I said softly. I was the invisible support beam he kicked whenever he was frustrated. It is time for the shadow to take a form of its own. Sarah reached across the desk and took my hand. Outside, the city was chaotic. I knew Daniel was running in circles, his phone burning a hole in his pocket, his creditors circling like sharks. But in here, it was quiet. I took the pen Sarah offered and signed my name on the donor wall registry. For the first time, I was not signing as a guarantor. I was not signing as a mother covering a mistake. I was signing as Eleanor Hart, a woman who was finally building a family that would appreciate her. I finally agreed to meet Daniel, but I refused to let him step foot in my house. Instead, we met in the small, windowless conference room at Francis Doyle's law office. I needed Francis there. I needed a witness. I knew my son well enough to know that without a third party, he would twist my words, rewrite history, and later claim I had promised him the moon. When Daniel walked in, he looked like a man who had not slept in 3 days. His designer suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and there were dark, bruised circles under his eyes. Yet, as soon as he saw me, he straightened his spine. The arrogance was cracked, but it was not broken. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He slammed his hand down on the mahogany table. You are destroying my life just because of one dinner where I misspoke, Daniel accused, his voice tight with suppressed rage. You are burning down a company that employs 50 people because of a bad seating arrangement. Do you think that is worthy of a mother? I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I simply reached into my folder and slid a single stack of papers across the table toward him. It was a spreadsheet. Francis and I had spent hours compiling it. It listed every financial transaction, every asset liquidated, every loan guaranteed, every overtime hour worked, and every piece of jewelry sold over the last 38 years. It was a balance sheet of my motherhood. This is not about a dinner. Daniel, I said, my voice steady and low. This is about a lifetime of you using my back as a ladder to climb up, and then turning around and kicking me down so you could look tall. That dinner, that Mother's Day, that was just the moment I finally checked the balance of the emotional account between us, and realized I was bankrupt. Daniel glanced at the papers, his face flushing red. I elevated you, he argued, gesturing wildly. I brought you into a different world. I took you to the Belmont. I gave you a glimpse of how the other half lives. I looked him dead in the eye. The $5 bouquet of wilting carnations you had the waitress hand me. Is that the class you are talking about? Is that how the other half lives? Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but Francis cut in. Her tone was sharp, professional, and devoid of pity. Mr. Hart, let us discuss the reality of your situation, Francis said. With the withdrawal of the Foundation's assets, you have lost controlling interest in Skyline. The board is moving to audit your personal use of company funds. If you cannot negotiate a settlement with the bank regarding the Riverfront Heights loan, you are looking at personal bankruptcy. Furthermore, Mrs. Hart has executed a new will. You have been removed as a direct beneficiary. The color drained from Daniel's face. The reality of the legal threat finally pierced his armor. He looked from Francis to me, his eyes widening in panic. He slumped into the chair opposite me, the fight leaving him all at once. "Mom, please," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Okay, I messed up. I get it. But at least give me back the house. Put the guarantee back on the house. If we lose the house, we have to move into a rental. Think about the kids. Think about their image at school. Do you want them to be ashamed?" I felt a pang of sorrow, but I crushed it instantly. The children's dignity is hurt when they see their father humiliate their grandmother in public. "Daniel?" I replied. "It is not hurt because they have to live in a smaller house or because they cannot vacation in Europe. Shame comes from character, not from a zip code." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the table. "Here is the deal," I said. "I will not press charges for the fraud regarding the signed documents. I will not push the ethics board to revoke your license entirely. I will stop the bleeding there. But I will not sign a single piece of paper for you ever again. I will not reinstate the guarantees. You have to go to that bank. You have to go to your board. And you have to negotiate your own survival. You have to fix this yourself." Daniel stared at me, tears welling in his eyes. He looked like a child again, the little boy who had scraped his knee. But this time, I was not reaching for the bandages. "So," what he whispered, his voice trembling, "to you? Am I not your son anymore?" I looked at him for a long time. I looked at the face that I had kissed 1,000 times, the face I had sacrificed my youth for. "You will always be my only son," I said softly. "But I will no longer allow you to treat me like a stranger while spending my money like an owner. I am choosing to keep the mother in my heart, but I am cutting the unlimited terms out of my wallet." I pushed a document toward him. It was a formal acknowledgement that he accepted the withdrawal of support and agreed not to contest the restructuring of the foundation. "Sign it," I commanded. Daniel picked up the pen. His hand shook violently. He looked at the paper, then at me, hoping for a last-minute reprieve. I gave him none. I sat like a stone. He lowered the pen and signed. The scratching sound was loud in the small room. He thought he was signing a death warrant for his lifestyle. He did not understand that he was actually signing the first honest document of his life. He was accepting the sentence of having to stand on his own 2 feet. It has been exactly 365 days since that dinner at the Belmont. My life looks very different now. I no longer have the corner office with the river view. I work in a cubicle at a small local real estate agency, selling starter homes to young couples who have more hope than money. I live in a 2-bedroom rental apartment 3 blocks from the train station. I am tired. I am working harder than I ever have in my life. And for the first time, I am paying for every single thing I own. But today, I thought I could fix it. I spent $80 on a bouquet of lilies, the kind Mum used to stop and admire in the shop windows, but would never buy for herself. I put on my best remaining suit and drove to the Northbridge Haven Community Centre. I told myself that enough time had passed. I told myself that life is like a movie, and if I just showed up with flowers and a sad smile, the credits would roll on a happy ending. When I arrived, The parking lot was full. A large banner draped across the entrance read, Mother's Day Gala, honoring the strength of single mothers. I walked toward the double doors, clutching the flowers, through the glass. I could see the hall was packed. There were hundreds of people, women holding babies, older women laughing, children running around. And on the small stage, under the bright lights, stood my mother. She looked radiant. She was not wearing the old navy dress she had worn to the restaurant. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that fit her perfectly. She was laughing, holding a microphone, surrounded by women who looked at her with pure adoration. Then, my breath caught in my throat. Sitting in the front row were Lauren and my children. They were dressed up. They were clapping. They had not told me they were coming. And sitting next to them, clapping the loudest, was Margaret. I watched as my daughter, Sarah, walked up onto the stage. She handed Mom a giant, handmade card. "Happy Mother's Day, Grandma," Sarah said into the microphone, her voice echoing in the hall. "You are the one who taught us about self-respect and kindness." I felt a physical pain in my chest. I had never said those words to her. Then Margaret stepped up to the podium. The room went quiet. Margaret took Mom's hand and looked at the audience. For a long time, I thought I was the one who taught this family about class, Margaret said, her voice wavering slightly. I was wrong. It turns out, Eleanor was the one teaching us about value, and we were too blind to see it. I am sorry, Eleanor, and I am so proud to call you my family. I could not stand it anymore. I pushed the door open, desperate to be part of that warmth. I needed to be in that light. A large man in a security uniform stepped in front of me immediately. "Private event, sir," he said, blocking my path. "Are you on the guest list?" "I am her son," I said, my voice rising in panic. "That is my mother up there." The guard did not move. Inside, the master of ceremonies began speaking. And now, let us honor the woman who started the New Beginnings grant, the host announced. A woman who was left behind at a dinner table by her own son. But instead of breaking, she took her own power back and used it to guarantee the future of hundreds of other families. The room erupted in applause. My face burned with shame. They knew. Everyone knew. At that moment, Mom looked up. Her gaze cut through the crowd, through the applause, and landed directly on me, standing in the doorway. The room seemed to blur until it was just the two of us. I raised the expensive lilies. I looked at her with pleading eyes. "Mom, please, I am sorry. Let me in." The room went silent, waiting for her reaction. Mom looked at me. There was no anger in her face. There was no hatred. There was just a calm, absolute finality. She looked at the flowers in my hand. Then she looked at the paper flower my son had just given her. She shook her head. It was a small movement, but it slammed the door on my hope harder than any shout could have. She turned back to the microphone. "Sometimes," Mom said, her voice clear and strong, "the best thing a mother can do for her child is to let him face the full consequences of the choices he signed his name to." She turned her back on me and hugged the children. The crowd cheered, a wall of sound that pushed me backward. I lowered the lilies. The petals were already starting to droop. I realized then that this was not a movie. There was no redemption arc just because I showed up. I turned around and walked out of the building, outside. A cold spring rain had started to fall. I walked to my used car, unlocked the door, and sat in the silence. Inside the hall, the party was just getting started. Mother's Day finally belonged to Eleanor Hart. She did not need me to validate her anymore. She had realized she was the sun, and I was just a planet that had drifted out of orbit. And as I drove away into the grey afternoon, I understood that the check had finally bounced. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It's a heavy one, isn't it? I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment down below and let me know where you are listening from and if you think Eleanor made the right choice in the end. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash that hype button so we can get this story out to more people who need to hear it. See you in the next video.